Hi boys and girls, welcome back to Writer's Workshop. Today's Writer's Workshop is going to start with a story. I'm going to read you the story called Harold and the Purple Crayon. And while you're listening to the story today, I want you to listen to how Harold is using his imagination. Harold is writing a fiction story. And we've talked about fiction stories. Fiction stories are stories that are using your imagination, and we've talked about writing personal narratives or nonfiction stories, real things that have happened in your life. Today, though, we're focusing on fiction and how Harold and the Purple Crayon used his imagination to write a fiction story. One evening, after thinking it over for some time, Harold decided to go for a walk in the moonlight. There wasn't any moon, and Harold needed a moon for a walk in the moonlight, and he needed something to walk on. He made a long, straight path so he wouldn't get lost, and he set off on his walk, taking his big purple crayon with him. But he didn't seem to be getting anywhere on that long, straight path, so he left the path for a shortcut across a field, and the moon went with him. Are you thinking about how Harold is using his imagination and his purple crayon? The shortcut led right to where Harold thought a forest ought to be. He didn't want to get lost in the woods, so he made a very small forest with just one tree in it. And it turned out to be an apple tree. The apples would be very tasty, Harold thought, when they got red. So he put a frightening dragon under the tree to guard the apples. It was a terribly frightening dragon. Do you think that'll scare anyone away that wants the apples? I think so. It even frightened Harold. He backed away. His hand, holding the purple crayon, shook. Suddenly, he realized what was happening. But by then, Harold was over his head in an ocean. I love Harold's imagination. He came up thinking fast, and in no time he was climbing aboard a trim little boat. He quickly set sail, and the moon sailed right along with him. After he sailed long enough, Harold made land without much trouble. He stepped ashore on the beach, wondering where he was. I wonder what Harold's going to draw with his crayon next. The sandy beach reminded Harold of picnics, and the thought of picnics made him hungry. So he laid out a nice, simple picnic lunch. There was nothing but pie. But there were all 9 kinds of pie that Harold liked best. When Harold finished his picnic, there was quite a lot left. He hated to see so much delicious pie go to waste. Do you have any predictions? What Harold might draw next with his purple crayon? I have a couple ideas. So Harold left a very hungry moose and a deserving porcupine to finish it up. And off he went, looking for a hill to climb to see where he was. Harold knew that the higher up he went, the farther he could see, so he decided to make the hill into a mountain. If he went up high enough, he thought, he could see the window of his bedroom. He got tired and felt he ought to be getting to bed. He hoped he could see his bedroom window from the top of the mountain. Do you think he can? But as he looked down over the other side, he slipped. And there wasn't any other side of the mountain. He was falling in thin air. But luckily, he kept his wits and his purple crayon, and he made a balloon, and he grabbed onto it. Whew, I'm glad he's okay. And he made a basket under the balloon, big enough to stand in. He had a fine view from the balloon, but he couldn't see his window. He couldn't even see his house. So he made a house with windows, and he landed the balloon on the grass in his front yard. None of the windows was his window. He tried to think where his window ought to be. So he made some more windows, and he made a big building full of windows. He made lots of buildings full of windows. He made a whole city full of windows. But none of the windows was his window. He couldn't think where it might be. Do you have any ideas? He decided to ask a policeman. The policeman pointed the way Harold was going anyway, but Harold thanked him. And he walked along with the moon, wishing he was in his room and in his bed. And then suddenly, Harold remembered. He remembered where his bedroom window was when there was a moon. Where was his window? It was always right around the moon. And then Harold made his bed. He got into it and he drew up the covers. And the purple crayon dropped on the floor and Harold dropped off to sleep. Isn't that the best story? I love how Harold used his imagination to write a fiction story. He thought of the characters in his story. Remember we talked about characters? He had a policeman in his story, and maybe even the moon was one of his characters, and he was a character in his story. And he made a setting. He was walking through drawing a tree and drawing a little forest, and then he went into the city, and then he was in his house. So he was the author. He thought of what his setting was going to be throughout his whole story. So boys and girls, today I want you to use your imagination, okay? You're going to take your 4 pieces of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to put them this way, the hot dog way. You're going to staple the end. And you're going to get ready to draw your fiction story this week using your imagination, just like Harold and the Purple Crayon. Remember, friends, that writers use letters and words in their stories, and we use letters and words to help our readers read the story, right? And we draw illustrations so the readers know where the setting is. Okay, so we're going to come back tomorrow and get started with our story, but in the meantime, use your imagination to think of an idea for tomorrow. Have fun, friends.